All right, welcome back to a very important part 2 of this drivetrain swap. So today I'll be going over the front differential and what I have done to make it the way it needs to be. This is the project that hit the fan, and I'll get to that here in a second. So the build started out with JD and our buddy Nick at the junkyard, and they ended up pulling a axle housing out of a Trooper, which didn't have the vacuum actuator on the housing itself, which was kind of a goal to get rid of that, to reduce the amount of mechanical components, to reduce failure rate, which would be overall a bit more reliable on the trail. The Trooper already came with a 456 gear ratio, and that's what I'm primarily trying to accomplish here, is to match the rear gear ratio. You don't want mismatched gear ratios in a four-wheel drive. So what I ended up doing was I took that Trooper axle and I completely blew it apart, resealed everything. I put new sealant on the third member, I put new axle seals on there, I put new bearings on there, and then I installed a breather port and I sealed that up as well. And I gave the whole axle housing a fresh coat of paint. Now I was really stoked for this axle housing because one, it's getting rid of the vacuum actuator on the front differential housing to engage the four-wheel drive, and then also the mounts have better bushings. The bushings on the mounts are still in one piece, and so I was pretty stoked to have some solid bushings on there again. So the time came to go ahead and replace the axle, and I wanted to just do a drop and swap type of deal, and it didn't quite work out. So what ended up happening is I pulled the knuckles, I pulled the front half shafts off, and then I dropped the axle housing down, set them side by side to get some photos and some video of it, and it turns out that the Trooper housing is actually about 3 inches narrower than the housing in the doozy. So that was super unfortunate to come by. That means I couldn't use that housing at all. So I kind of just said, all right, whatever, it's fine. I'll just use the existing housing. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna swap over the mounts from the Trooper housing onto the existing housing that I have, just so I can utilize those bushings that are already there that are better. Turns out those are completely different as well. The Trooper mounts are actually bigger. They're actually a lot beefier than the ones that are on the doozy right now. But unfortunately, I couldn't press out those bushings and then put them into the existing housing that I've got, considering they're completely different. What I ended up doing is I put the knuckles back on the doozy without the front axle in there, and it drove around for a couple days to give me some time to locate some bushings so I could swap those out and put some fresh bushings in there. Unfortunately, that didn't work out. I even had a buddy who's really good at finding parts help me out, and he called me on the phone. He's like, dude, I can't find anything for these. So that was quite unfortunate within itself. So what I did is I blew both housings apart, and I took the third member from the Trooper, the 456 third member from the Trooper, cleaned it all up again, resealed it, and put it in the doozy's housing. And what I also ended up doing is I cleaned up and resealed the actuator housing as well. And then I drilled, tapped, and installed 2 new breather ports on both the housing and on the actuator. There's 2 breathers there. Unfortunately, I couldn't use those bushings and I couldn't use a housing, so I just went on with it. I went on with the project. So I gave the doozy housing a nice cleaning and a fresh coat of paint. And then when I had the second to check again, I was like, oh dang, let me check that front drive shaft to see if it will fit the Trooper third member pinion flange, because they are different. So it is good to know that those third member housings are completely swappable. So, and then what I ended up doing is, luckily I was able to put it all together and then put it back up in the truck, actuate it, test it all out, and thankfully it worked. While I was in there, I installed new breather hoses and the vacuum lines for the actuator. And well, that's it. There actually really wasn't much to replacing it, except for the unfortunate event that I couldn't use the Trooper housing. But you know what? It's fine, I guess. It gives me some time to locate the bushings for the mounts itself, because I gotta drop the axle again anyways to do the motor mounts, but that's a different story and I'll get into that later. So all in all I essentially did was I blew apart the rebuilt Trooper axle. I took the new axle seals I installed on it. I took the new bearings I installed on it that were freshly greased, and then I swapped it all back over to the Honduzu's existing housing and swapped out just the third member, the 456 third member, and that was essentially it. I installed the breather ports too, but as far as the totality of it, there wasn't much to it. So that's it for this video. Stick around for the third video of this series where I'm actually installing the transfer case. That I already know is gonna need a couple modifications. So I haven't filmed it yet. I have not installed it yet at this point. I don't have all of my information ready for you guys. So stick around for that video to come. But in the meantime, your 456 swapped, right? So I hope to see you guys on the next video. And if you have any questions, comments, and concerns about the swap and what I have done for the install, feel free to put it in the comment section below and I'll get back to you guys on that. All right, see you later.